I was taught about inoculation as especially as inoculating seeds. So inoculation to mean bringing an influence of life, of biology, of microorganisms into contact with seed and further with soil. So as a means of inoculating the soil with life, kind of like a probiotic we might take as people to repopulate our digestive systems, our microbiome after a bout with antibiotics or some other sickness that might have otherwise compromised our gut system and thus our immune system. So taking a probiotic to reintroduce the microflora and fauna so that we can properly digest our food and turn it into bone and muscle and energy and memory. So that same idea concept translated into recognizing a possible like deficiency or depletion of life in our agricultural soils and wanting to reintroduce that life somehow. So inoculation through seed. So the seed becomes kind of a carrier of the microbiology. And so what I've used in the past is different formulas mixed already in powder form. Actually, first I was introduced to inoculation on organic farms, inoculating legumes with the Rhizobacter bacteria. And the idea behind that is that in order for legumes to do the job of taking atmospheric nitrogen and transforming it into nitrate and plant available nitrogen in the soils, that bacteria has to first be present in the soil. The legume is basically a symbiotic host to that bacteria. It will not create that bacteria, but legumes are hosts of that bacteria. So all that to say is, in order for legumes to do their job, that bacteria has to be in the soil. And so we would inoculate legumes with a water mixed inoculant, and soak the seeds in that for a night before planting. And that was making sure that once the legumes, the peas we were planting at that time were planted, when they sprouted, they would have the bacteria, the Rhizobacter bacteria, there present in the soil, who would then be able to populate the roots of the legumes, and this help the legumes to transform and take that nitrogen out of the atmosphere and turn it into soil nitrogen. So that same idea kind of applied to a more broad spectrum microbiology. So not just the Rhizobacter bacteria, but thousands of other different species of bacteria and mycorrhizae and protozoa and all those, recognizing that all life forms have different ways of transforming atmospheric mineral element and other soil mineral and elements into forms that the plants can take. And plants will, basically, and what I feel is in a healthy functioning ecology, plants and microbiology work in harmony in that when the plant is in need of something, it communicates with the microbiology in the soil and on the leaves to, work together to find what the plant is needing at that time in the soil, and then bringing that to the plant. And so having a diversity of different species and genera of microbiology in the soil is like a foundational support system for the plant in order to access what the plants need when they need it. They have many different, people to call on to help them find what they need. And those people are the biology and the mycorrhizae and all the, the fungi and everybody. So I've inoculated seeds in the past with like broad spectrum inoculants, powdered inoculants. Ellen, maybe we could put in the chat or just share along at some point some resources. But the bionutrient.org has a whole list of really good resources for finding inoculants as well. But a broad spectrum inoculant that has a diversity of biology, bacteria, mycorrhizae, protozoa, etc. in it, and a powder. And so in the past, I've just taken a pinch of the powder from the container and put it into every seed packet that I'll be planting. And I usually do that around this time before I get really busy with planting. And so in every seed packet, a pinch or two of the powder, and the powder is usually a mixture of the different like multicellular organisms or single cellular organisms, the microbiology, plus some filler. So it's like clay or something. So when you're taking a pinch, you're taking, so many individual microorganisms and some filler, and putting that into the packet of seeds and shaking it up so that hopefully theoretically every seed is covered in this powder, this dust, which contains the microbiology, and then taking those seeds and either planting them into a potting soil or direct seeding them into the garden soil, the farm soil, agricultural soil, whenever you're ready to plant. And then watering them reactivates these dormant microorganisms. So they're basically resting, hibernating until they're introduced back to water, and that livens them up, and then they get to working. And so taking the seeds from the packet, putting them into the soil, is inoculating the soil through the seed being the carrier of these microorganisms.
Are there other things you can put in the soil that help that process as well when you're planting seeds? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so to use the analogy again of the human microbiome, when we take a probiotic or we eat sauerkraut or something, some way of inoculating our digestive system with bacteria and beneficial microbes, those bacteria are only going to stay there if they have food to eat. And so that's where like a good diet of a broad, spectrum of nutrients in our food is absolutely necessary in our nutrition and our health and especially the microbiome health. Is those bacteria are only going to stick around in our gut if they have some food to eat. So the good foods that we're eating, especially the prebiotic foods, so ones that are very high in complex carbohydrates and nutrients and inulin and foods that are high in trace minerals, those foods are prebiotics. They are going to feed the bacteria that are in our gut so that they can flourish and thrive and then transform the foods that we're eating into what our bodies need as well. So in the soil, what that looks like, what a whole diet form of nutrition for those soil microbes is rock dust, is kelp meal, is biochar even helps, not as a nutrition, but as like a shelter and a protection for the bacteria to be in the soil and have the kind of shelter in the soil. I would say like rock dust, kelp meal, alfalfa meal, anything that's like a complex form of nutrition that we would normally be, amending our soils with, but putting those into the potting soil. And then also just holding in our minds that framework that when we're amending the soils with rock dust, what we're doing is not just putting those minerals into the soil, like that physical exchange, but we are also doing that to feed the biology that are already there so that they can survive and thrive while they're there and turn those minerals into food for the plants.
So that's something you put in the seed starting mix, not just in a potting soil for a transplant or something like that.
Right. So in a potting soil mix, like a very basic one that I use is the basalt dust, like two organic potting soil. I will add rock dust, so that being, quarry dust, be basalt or granite dust, plus kelp meal. And then I'll also add, if I have it, some biochar just in there, and anything else that I have that can be food for the microbiology.
Any other questions? We're caught up in the chat.
Did that make sense? I just want it, like, I don't want to be sounding complicated. I just, the analogy between the human practice and microbiome and the soil helps me to think about this in a more, soil nutrition and fertility as something that is not separate from our own practices of nutrition.
Have you seen the difference when you have not inoculated and when you have?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's a long-term thing, I would say. I'm still learning how to, listen to plants and have the conversations with the plants in the gardens in the way that, I'm more connected into the, kind of the energies of what things need, and what, when they're most healthy and most, resonant and vibrant, the plants. But yeah, I think over time, I was working in gardens for 8 years, many different gardens. And I think, Rudy's one that someone who I've worked very closely with. And, we've inoculated seeds for every year pretty much. And for the 6 years that I was working with Rudy, and I think the gardens seem to flourish, but again, it's experiential. I think the inoculation is also a buffer to sickness and disease. So like our immune systems as human beings are, I think there's numbers out there that say, 70% of the cells that make up our immune system are located in our digestive tract. So what that says is that our overall resilience and immunity is, codependent on our digestive system. And so how we are able to respond to stresses and, build resilience, our immunology, depends on what we're eating. And so in the soil, what that looks like, if, the soil is like the plant's immune system. And so if the immune system, if the soil is healthy, those plants are not going to get sick as much. They're not going to get, the different bacterial and fungal infections that happen, basically because if they have a strong immune system, a resilient immune system, a vibrant and diverse soil structure and compositionality, the soil is going to be able to meet the needs of the plants and be responsive to the plants. So, I mean, so when you asked me that question, Ellen, like I don't know how to measure it outside of like the energy that is felt in the gardens, kind of like the resonance and the vibrancy of the plants, just seeing them in the way that they are. It's a lot of empirical kind of just like things, not factual, but like, I think people get it when you're in a space that feels like alive, what that feels like. And I would feel that in these gardens. Mm-hmm. And then I would also see, I think it manifests in the plants, not getting sick, not getting the pests and the insects, just bombarding them all the time, or the different bacterial wilts or the fungal diseases. A majority, like most of the time, the plants did really well.
Excuse me, Kristen, do you want to mention what you've seen in the science world?
Sure. I just got really excited listening to Doug. Thanks, Doug. I always enjoy talking with you. I'm going to drag you at your pace to talk with my students, so beware.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, when I'm back east.
I love that too. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've been seeing, so much in the science, of, everything from, and I'm really curious about it too. And maybe Doug has some answers on, the gut brain and, health connection has been really, just really booming in the science that I've been reading. And we know that, these vegetables with, insoluble fiber really kind of feed our gut, right? So, we eat food, we digest it, but the especially things like legumes, go into our digestive system, and they actually feed our colons, right? They're like the energy for our colons. And it's just incredible to me to think about like how that's connected. And I'm also interested, and Doug, maybe you have an idea about this. I've lived in Latin America for a long time, and I know that people from Latin America, I've had numerous friends who've come to stay in the States with me or friends, and I've said that their body is just completely thrown off because they're eating these more processed foods, and they're not eating the rice and beans that they eat every day. And it comes to my mind immediately, like, they have this probably a very healthy microbiome, and they're very, and just, even when I try to prepare rice and beans in here in the States, they don't taste the same as there. I don't know whether do you think there's something about the minerals, that are in the soil? Do you think it's something just about the complex carbohydrates? I don't know if you, can comment on that. It's always perplexed me, but.
I can comment on it. Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but I think, also like having traveled around South America, well, Central America mostly, and other parts of the world. And yeah, I think seeing both patterns across this country and in other countries. And I mean, I think there's a way of, I think, that I've started to look at food in a way that's been helpful for me in, like, I think like being able to connect with like our bodies and our needs in a deeper way. And I see food like the actual, so like the tomato, like that tomato is not, I'm not being nourished by this tomato. What I am being nourished by is that tomato being a conveyor. That tomato is a carrier of mineral to my body, and mineral first to feed the microbiome in my body, who then turn that mineral from that tomato into a form. They then feed my body. So it's going through this process, and I'm not being directly nourished by a fruit. That fruit is feeding first my microbiome, who is then feeding me. And I would say too, not just on the kind of biochemical level. I've been seeing food as like this mineral, this nutrient, this element that has so many different protons and electrons, and like the the science of nutrition is actually like incredibly fascinating to me. Like, how are we actually being nourished by food? It's like a deeply spiritual, metaphysical process to think about it as well, not just a biochemical one. And so I see like a good diet, like quote unquote good diet, not just being one that is conveying a biochemical like influence of minerals, but a coherence of energies. And so like a fruit from a plant that is like loving where it is, that is thriving, that is able to get all of its needs met, the fruit from that plant is going to convey that vibrancy, that energy to me when I eat it. And like a fruit that is growing from a plant that is not well is going to convey that energy to my body as well. And so I see like malnutrition or a lack of nutrition as not just being a lack of mineral, but a lack of abundant energy, a lack of vibrancy that is moving through that food. And so that gets into how that food is grown, where it's grown. It comes into like the ecology of who's growing it, how the social conditions of the people who are actually growing that food, touching that food, like the energies that they are conveying to the plants and the fruit. Because like plants and fruit are not living things. Like these are like human beings just like us. Like we all relay and convey energy from each other, and we pass that along. Like that is as real as anything else. And plants do the same. Plants will pick up energy from the people, from the other, beings in that ecology that they're growing on, and convey that energy through the plant. So that's why I talk a lot about systemic issues in agriculture. Why I feel like, why racism and sexism in agriculture have as much and need to be part of the conversation as much as like good agricultural practice, because those systemic things influence the plants, influence the land that the food that we're eating eventually comes from. And so if we want to talk about growing vibrant, like fruit and plants, we have to think about the ecology that those plants are growing in, and not just not just the agricultural, not just the soil ecology, but the human ecology as well. And so this is a long answer to your question, Kristen, but I feel like the influence and effect of colonization on the land, influences the nutrition of our bodies. And so when we are able to grow and share food in kind of like deeply, respectable and reciprocal ways, the lineages of food and in family and community that is passed, like those are maintaining a legacy that is really held in the food. And like when we eat that food, it is resonant with that life, with those stories. And so I think that is as much about nutrition, that it influences as much nutrition as the mineral content of the foods. But I think all of those things kind of work together.
Hey,
totally so agree. There's a question from Rudy about once we sow the seeds in the seed start mix, it's important to mix the water we spray on it with humates, soil conditioner, liquid kelp, molasses kind of thing. Any comments on that, Doug?
I just want to say that was the coolest answer I've ever heard. That was really astounding and inspiring, Doug. I just want to say that quick first.
Thank you. Who is that? I didn't see who that was.
That was
Irene.
Irene.
Oh, Irene. Hey, hey, Irene. Hey, you guys. Yeah, sorry, I can just kind of keep talking. So thank you, Ellen, for reining me in.
Just want to make sure we keep everybody's questions up there. So Rudy wants to know about, spraying something on as a soil conditioner.
So on the soil, yeah, I think so. Like Rudy watering the seeds in with that kind of that mixture. Is that?
Yes, that's that's your practice also. You made
so I think, is that kind of like a soil drench?
Well, well, my understanding is that it's the seed itself has everything needs to grow, but once it's in a mixture that really doesn't have a lot of organic matter, you just cannot just give it water. You have to give some nutrients. I think that's the idea.
Yeah, in potting soil specifically.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's this seed mix that use. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, like the liquid humates, the liquid kelp, like all of those things are in effect to feed and support the biology that is being inoculated through the seed into that soil, be it a potting soil or in the garden soil. And so, just like in ideal circumstances, seeds don't need anything. An acorn falls from an oak tree and it doesn't need people there feeding it, nutrients and things. And that's because there is an ecology still intact. There's a community still there in the forest soil. And agriculture is different in that it is a practice of facilitated disturbance. When we till soil, when we turn prairie or lawn into a garden, we are creating a disturbance in a way. We are inverting that soil ecosystem and changing things really drastically. We are changing relationships where there were mycorrhizae, where there were bacteria flourishing and interconnecting between the fields and the forests. We are creating a disturbance to that interconnection, that relationship. And so, because we are doing that, we then have a responsibility, I think, as gardeners, as people in this process, to the best of our ability, try and not mimic, but give back what we have taken away, and continue to give and maintain right relationship with the plants in the soil. And so the practice of inoculation and the practice of then feeding, the prebiotics, the humates, the kelp, etc., the minerals, those are a way of maintaining kind of a relationship of reciprocity, I think, in recognizing that we created a disturbance because we needed to plant these plants, but then we will do to the best of our capacity to continue to build upon and feed and support the growing of that garden and the ecology there, so that the life can flourish and the plants can flourish.
Yeah. I was thinking more when you start the seed indoors, that is not a natural situation. I mean, ideally you do it outdoors, but in the Northeast, it's best frequently is to start indoors. So yeah, you want to replicate what's happening outdoors, indoors, and so you have to
exactly.
Yeah.
And so planting in a sterilized potting media, right. Something that you would maybe buy at a department store that is advertising to be sterile, and might use language like a planting medium. Like that's not what we want. If that's all that we have access to, then we can enhance that with other things like adding compost to that, or adding humates to that, or adding minerals to that. I like, if I can, start with a foundation of organic potting soil, which has compost, has different forms in it, and it's an easy planting. It's easy to plant into, but I will add to that all of the things that we're talking about and more. But I hear you, Rudy. Like it's trying our best to replicate and mimic the outdoor soils indoors, and provide an environment for those seeds to germinate and grow up and thrive to a point where we can get them to and then transplant them to the outside.
Anyone else? Let me put a question out to everybody. What are you guys starting right now? And inside, I'm presuming. Anybody want to give a report about what you guys are doing? Amy, you must be doing something.
Maybe we can talk about this.
Nobody's starting any seeds?
Not yet. We just ordered a plant stand with lights, so we're anticipating and excited, but not yet.
I actually have a garlic question. I haven't planted garlic here before. And someone just gave me garlic that they planted and it's starting to sprout. And they said, here, plant this. So I have a bag of garlic, but we still have snow on the ground. Technically it's melting. Should I like dig it up and plant it? Or how do I, I have a Ziploc of garlic. What do I do with snow on the ground?
Oh, that's exciting. You could try putting it in. I mean, I'm in the Northwest right now, and it's kind of a pretty different place out here. So the soil is, you know, we can do things in the soil. We're not covered in snow, and so I'm guessing though that the ground is probably pretty hard at this point too in the Northeast. And so digging up soil and planting the seed might be really hard. But what you could do is maybe start to put those garlic seeds into pots and let them grow up a little bit. And then once they're big enough, then transplanting them into the garden when the soil is a little bit warmer and easy and able to kind of work a little bit.
Okay.
If you don't have the space for that, maybe putting them into some like a sawdust or something that will keep them alive and from rotting, but will maintain moisture and things until the soil is warm enough to plant those garlics in, which might be another month or so. I don't know.
Okay, how big a pot should I put these in? So it's so odd, I know. The one just last week, she's like, I grew these and plant them.
Well, I mean, how many do you have? How many cloves?
She gave me like 6 bulbs. It's a lot,
6 bulbs.
really.
Okay, so like 40, 50 cloves. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would open this up to anybody else who might have other ideas, but I would say even in like Dixie cups, you can put soil in, plant the seed, do that. Or yeah, maybe, I don't know, keeping them in the fridge, but I like to open that up to anybody else if anybody had thoughts. Dara.
Well, whatever you do, make sure you keep the the skin of each clove intact. So when you break it apart, keep that papery thing that's around it intact.
Or when I plant it?
Or when you plant, yeah, when you break the bulb apart and you plant it.
Okay.
That's not really answering your question, but just a little tidbit.
Yeah, I don't want them to rot. Last time I tried to plant garlic, it it didn't make it before it got in the ground.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
How about a 10-ounce paper cup with sterile soil in it?
Okay. I can do that.
Yeah, that might just give it enough time. And then if you could keep those outside, so that the garlic, because the garlic really, it does like cold. There's something about planting the garlic in the fall, having it over winter that does enhance that garlic. So though working with what you have, like keeping the garlic in that cold environment, if you're able, so planting them in the 10-ounce cups in the soil. And yeah, I think in that case, a sterile soil mix might be fine, just to have like some surrounding medium around that garlic. And then
I can put them.
yeah, you can put them outside. Yeah, it might be better
that's
putting them
great.
outside than keeping them inside.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't try to put them under a grow light or something.
Yeah, they might get too big before they can go out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's also have you heard about winter sowing? You can put them in a plastic, I'll send you a link about winter sowing. You can put it in a little container outside and it'll sprout when it's ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds similar. I just don't know if I could dig in the ground right now because she just gave it to me last week.
No, you actually put it in a plastic container, like you either cut a jug in half or a plastic salad container. You put soil in it, you put the clove in there, and then you cover it and just leave it outside with some drainage on top and bottom.
Okay, yeah,
I'll
send it to me.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Doug, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Can you explain the difference between liquid humides and foliar sprays? And does any of them compare, in your opinion, come close to comfrey tea, or is either of them organic?
Yeah, I'll start with the last one. So I think liquid humates are organic, just making sure that, and I think Lee's on the call. I think Mill River does carry liquid humates. And I believe they are OMRI certified, some of them, but making sure that they are. Liquid humates can be, can you put this in? Sorry, the battery's just running low. Liquid humates can be a foliar spray. So that is, they're not, it's not an either or thing. So a foliar spray is more of a, like kind of blanket, thank you. Well, not blanket, but like encompassing grouping of mineral amendments that can be applied to the leaves of plants. So liquid humates can be both, liquid humates can be a foliar spray, or they can also be applied as soil drenches. So that's sorry, that way. And Lee might be able to share some more information on that. I really like comfrey tea. I really like the weed teas. I think they have a different kind of energetic influence on plants than humates, but they're complementary. So again, humates are, when compost recomposes down to its elemental form, it becomes mostly carbon, or humates, and there's humic acid. So humates are and if anybody else on the call would correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but humates are a very stable form of carbon. And so they are able to convey both that carbon and like the properties of carbon, the properties of a stable carbon source to the plants, which is less of a nutrient amendment, but more of a structural supportive for bacteria and such, to then find, so humus and carbon like have incredible surface areas that are like cracks and crevices where bacteria and such can take shelter in. And so the humates are like an amending of that. And then if you mix that with comfrey tea, so if you're using the fresh leaves of comfrey plant or the fresh leaves of nettle or Japanese knotweed leaves, or any of the weeds that are growing very prolifically in your garden or around the woods or anywhere, you're basically like, and making a tea with that, you are making an inoculant. So not just the minerals that are extracted from those leaves into the water, but also the biology that live on those leaves into the water. And then when you mix that with humates and then spray that onto the plants, the agricultural plants, you are introducing both the minerals and the biology, and then also the structural components in the humates that are going to give that biology a place to just hang out, digest all of those minerals, and then feed the plant through the leaf surfaces. Or if you do it through a drench, soil drench, doing it through the soil. If that answers any of your question.
Yeah. And how does that compare with the foliar spray, the liquid humides, or are they much the same?
So foliar spraying liquid humates?
Yeah, the difference between the two?
Well, so again, I think a foliar spray is more of a practice. So you can foliar spray comfrey tea, you can foliar spray liquid humates. And so foliar spray is just meaning a liquid spray on the foliage, on the leaves of the plants. So a foliar spray or a soil drench you can do. And a soil drench is basically what it sounds like, is just a liquid amendment fed to the plant through the soil. So watering the plants, the roots of the soil with that drench, with those minerals or humates.
Right. So you'd recommend using the comfrey tea and the liquid humates? Yeah,
if you're making a comfrey tea, you can just mix in some of the humates to that batch of water, that batch of tea that you're making. So what I usually do is I'll harvest the leaves of the comfrey or the nettles or whatever it is as early in the day as I can. So before so this is the kind of a practice too with the actual foliar spray. So Dan Kittredge said this once and it really stuck with me. So doing a foliar spray and then also harvesting the leaves that you're going to make a tea with when the birds are singing. So in the early morning or the later in the evening. So I will harvest the leaves as early as I can. I'll fill a bucket with the leaves about halfway, and then I will fill that bucket to the fullness with water. And then just kind of mix it all together and let it sit for a couple of hours. So it's steeping, it's a tea. It's kind of, if you would think of a tea bag, putting it into hot water and letting the water extract the minerals and the essence of that herb into the menstruum, into the water. And so basically doing the same thing, but it's with comfrey leaves, and the water is extracting the mineral and the biology from the comfrey leaves into the water itself. So you could just add liquid humates into that tea. It kind of be like honey you add to a peppermint tea or something like that. And then spraying, it's best to spray foliar spray when the birds are singing too. So either in the morning or in the evening, not in the middle of the day, because that is when the plants are resting. Their stomatas are closed. They're not going to be able to receive those minerals. And that liquid might also burn on the leaves in the midday.
And is it better to water the plants before you put on these sprays?
I don't know. I'm sure there is some connection between the plants being hydrated enough to receive that foliar spray and the biology and the minerals in that foliar spray if they are well hydrated. So I would say making like that the plants are not dehydrated will enhance the effectivity of the foliar spray.
Yeah. When I make the comfrey tea, I don't know if you do the same, but I usually let the leaves sit in a bucket for 3 weeks. Is that
so? That's a different process. So if you're making like the kind of probiotic weed tea that I'm talking about is more of maintaining an aerobic environment. So that's why I only let it steep for 2 hours, because after 2 hours, the oxygen can be used up in that bucket of water. And so after that, it turns into an anaerobic process. And so 3 weeks of the comfrey in water is going to be an anaerobic recomposition of minerals. And what that does, it's an entirely different process, because minerals and mineralogy start to do all sorts of really complex things in an anaerobic environment over time. And so when you use that after 3 weeks or longer, it's going to smell really bad, because it's an anaerobic decomposition, which produces ammonia and produces these off gases that are very smelly. But that liquid that you are left with is going to, I don't know as much about anaerobic processes and how to use that, but it's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just going to be a different thing. So yeah, that if anybody else knows more on the call about kind of anaerobically made amendments, that would be.
I think it involves using a bubbler. That's what I've heard. That's what I've used for longer term.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On the 2-hour brew, is that using ambient temperature water or hot water, like a tea?
Yep.
Room temperature?
Yeah, room temperature.
Okay.
I'll do it. I'll just, water is, warm, not like heated water. But I'll use whatever I have access to. If it's a hose with tap water, well water, I will add that, to it, and then just let it sit in the sun maybe to steep, because I think the warmer the water is, the more effective it is at extracting the minerals. You don't want it too hot, because it's also, we're wanting to inoculate, draw and be a home for the bacteria. So if it's too hot, it's going to disturb that process.
Rudy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I learned the other day that city water, and that's where we have in the garden, has a lot of chlorine, and that's not good for the plants. So how can I, because as you know, I have overhead sprinkler, so how I can mitigate that negative effect on, chlorine water that I'm put on the plants.
Yeah, it's really hard, Rudy. I don't, yeah. I mean, there are hookups that you can put onto a hose, between the hose and maybe at the source, if it's coming out of a building. There's something, and folks might know more about this, but there is something that you could put onto and attach the hose that makes the water, before it goes through the hose into the sprinkler and out to the garden, it goes through this processing that I know people that do this to kind of re-enlivening and a reinvigoration of the spiral energy to water. Tap water is basically dead water. A river water is alive. Ocean water is alive. There's kind of components and physiology to that water that are life affirming. And so tap water has been depleted of that. And so there are kind of magnetic things that can be attached to a hose that will re-enliven that water before it goes through the hose and out through the sprinkler and onto the plants. I don't know a lot about that. And as far as chlorine and off-gassing, I actually noticed that. I remember that a lot, Rudy, about the garden, was that there was some days where you could really feel the kind of like presence of that chlorine on the plants that had been like watered earlier in the morning when we had them on timers or something. So it does have an incredible effect.
Right.
The chlorine does, but I don't have an answer right now. Through a sprinkler, if you can use buckets, if you're using kind of like more of a moving of water that way, filling a 50-gallon drum with the water and letting it just sit in off gas for a few hours, the chlorine ions will off gas. A lot of them will, and then the water will have less of that in it. So watering after that can help.
And this lady recommended adding humates, and also they mentioned it like those pumps that you have to aerate the water, to help aerate the water. That something that, but that requires a lot of manpower to be able to do it, because you have to do by hand, unless you do the drip irrigation that you have a 50-gallon, but that's a pain. That's
yeah. I mean, I feel like there are minerals that will, and I'm sure there are, that will either chelate or bind that chlorine, and keep it out of access from the plant roots. So amending soils with, and I think that's kind of an important thing to think about, like remineralization, is that amending soils with a broad spectrum of minerals is putting in kind of the building blocks, the foundations of plant nutrition, so that plant can take what it wants when it needs it, and not necessarily be force-fed things that it doesn't need, like chlorine element or like lead or arsenic, things that are actually hard on the plant. But I mean, if like your table, if you're at a buffet and all there is like a food that you don't like, you would prefer not to eat, but you're hungry, you will eat that food. But if there's like tons of different beautiful, lovely, delicious food on the table, you'll be able to eat what you want and have a choice. And so like in the soil, if there is a broad spectrum of minerals and elements in the soil, the plants are going to be able to, when there's a healthy functioning ecology, biology in the soil, those plants are going to be able to take what they need when they need it, and not take what, if there's an overabundance of one element or of too much of one thing, they might have to eat that. That's just something that I'm thinking
on. Makes sense. It really truly makes sense. Thank you for that thought.
Dara's comment is she used a fish tank pump in a big bucket, or you could use a rain barrel.
I think there's also aerators that you can put between like the spout and the hose. If you have, Lee, do you have stuff like that where there's like an aerator between the hose and the spigot?
I don't know. I know that there is something that you can hook up. Like Frankie actually gets it because we have chlorine water at Mill River. He actually has gotten stuff to water his plants. It's like the size of a water bottle. You hook it up to the spigot, and then you hook your hose up to it, and it takes the chlorine and whatnot out. But we don't have anything. I'll have to look into that.
If you have a question, please speak up. Maybe you don't feel like you're being heard, or you're raising your hand or something.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I just want to put a plug for the bionutrient.org resources list on there for folks that are interested in trying to research some more. But sorry.
Oh no, I was just thinking for drinking water, you can easily get carbon and other types of filters to filter out chlorine and various other impurities. And I just Googled it, and I just Googled, water filter garden hose, and there are several such filters that you can buy.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question then. Because you were talking about the, the health of the garden, and I missed a lot of that because my Zoom kept kicking me off. So I hope this isn't like going backwards. If you have a small garden or a school garden, do you have specific foods you would recommend to grow, like to eat, that could be harvested either, before school's out in May, June, which is crazy early, or, you know, September at the late, you know, like on the later side when school is just starting. Would you have any specific plant recommendations? By chance.
Yeah, I would defer to Rudy right now. Rudy is a school teacher. I think Rudy's learned a lot about this over the last years. If you have anything.
Well, I have the advantage. My students come for summer school, so I have 2 weeks off, beginning at the end. But one that's very tough is tomatoes, because they start ripening right almost when we're going for vacation. So tomatoes, but I think garlic is great because, I mean, you harvest before the school's over. Kale, I love kale. That's one of my favorite. I think Doug's favorite also, kale. And I think any of the cold crops, I think you're okay with it. And yeah, tomatoes and peppers, stuff like that. It's right in the summers when you start harvesting them. So those are tough. But the cold crops, I think they're excellent.
If I can say a couple things, I've done a few school gardens. I think
Amy, yes.
Yeah, hi. Popcorn is a really good one because you plant it, but you harvest it the following September. Popcorn and sunflowers are excellent to do because they can come back to them in September and you don't have to worry about them too much over the summer. Definitely kale. Radishes are really good because they go quickly and they're done before school is out. I've done radishes and dill. Herbs are really good to do with kids too, because they come back every year and you can always harvest them throughout the season. Let me see. I've done peppers actually. I've done hot pepper seedlings and then they come back to them. So some of them may be, you know, a little bit rotted, but also a lot of times I'll ask the people who are maintenance who come to the school during the summertime if they want to harvest things in the garden. Or sometimes the teachers will come in and make a delivery to a local food pantry or something like that with things that are not there for kids to harvest. Strawberries are really good too because they're early. Asparagus is excellent also because you can get the asparagus in the spring and then the seeds are good in the fall. You can harvest the asparagus seed, which is really fun. I'm sure there's more, but that's what I can think of right now.
Yeah, I would say too that a Jerusalem artichoke, which is it'll come back every year, and you want to plant it somewhere where that it will be able to be contained. But the Jerusalem artichoke is good to harvest after the frost. So you could, you know, that's a fun thing to do with kids in the, you know, October, November is the harvest, and then they come back up the next year. I think corn as well is a wonderful, wonderful plant. And I got into a habit of planting, wherever I would plant corn, I would also plant beans. And you could then plant the third sister or the squash, if you had like a kind of bigger plot. But I would suggest, like, if you were to plant corn, and I think Amy's suggestion on popcorn is wonderful because that, you know, gets into a whole fun activity with the kids and being able to pop on popcorn from a plant that they planted. But planting beans 2 weeks after you would plant the corn, so that the beans they can climb up. They don't need a trellis because the corn becomes their trellis. And then they will also, being legumes, will also help to feed the soil with the nitrogen and feed the corn. So I just, wherever I plant corn, I also like to plant beans along with them, even if it's without the squash.
Yeah, I have a question about the corn and also the sunflower. I noticed that they're very tall, and when there's a heavy wind, really make havoc with the corn. Really, I planted maybe a couple of years ago, and it was not very successful. I had to put stakes and things like that to keep them up, and the sunflower, the same thing. I mean, some of them are huge, and very easy. They topple very easily. Any suggestion with those?
Well, I've definitely had those issues before. I've lost corn in windstorms for sure, especially if there's a lot of wind and water, because their roots aren't very deep and they'll fall over. But I also had a sunflower this year completely break off and stay alive and grow smaller sunflowers from the stem that was lying sideways. So you kind of never know what's going to happen to that. And actually this year I also had popcorn completely fall down and then stand back up. Like, it was amazing. Of course, the squirrels ate every single kernel, but but they did, you know. So I think making sure that the spacing is good of the corn will help. And also there are shorter corn varieties. So maybe I think I'm going to try to find some that are a little bit shorter that might not be as vulnerable.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's a little past 8. I kind of want to respect people's schedules as much as we could probably go on forever, or I could. So hopefully we'll do this in another couple of weeks. And I just want to remind you guys, one of our BFAers, oh, look at Doug, your puppy, has a radio show on Monday nights on HudsonRiverRadio.com, Allison Turkin. And you can check in with her. She usually interviews a farmer and talks about what they're doing. So that's HudsonRiverRadio.com, or you can go to her Dig Farm Facebook page. We'll be having some BFA tips as well. So thank you. I just want to thank Doug. And what's your puppy's name?
This is Juna.
Juna.
Oh, Juna. Beautiful. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
God.
You little pug.
Oh, thanks to Doug and Juna. All right, everybody. Great seeing you. We'll have a lot to talk about as time goes on. So happy growing. Thanks for coming. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, Doug.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Doug.
Bye, Rudy.
Bye, bye, Doug.
Nice seeing you. Good night. Yeah, bye-bye.
Doug, are you coming back?
Yes.
When?
Yes.
When?
Who is that? Is that
Irene?
Oh, Irene.
I know.
I sounded like Natasha. I'm sorry. I'm on a phone, so I can't see everybody.
My hair's tied up, so you don't know who I am.
No, I know who you are. I can recognize that beard anywhere. Graham, nice to see you both. Yeah. I'm not quite sure yet. But definitely be back in August. I'm might come back for a couple months between now and then, but we'll see. But yeah, after August.